Okay, so hello, we are here at the JCON conference with François Martin, who is a speaker, and he had a talk about testing tools, I would say, for Java. And it was a nice overview. There were some tools that I didn't know before, but now maybe I had also the feeling like there are too many tools, and it happens to me on projects that every developer has their own favorite tools, and now for example with these assertions, there are people who just use the assertions from JUnit, and I personally really like the assert.j that you presented. Now, what to do in such a situation? Because somebody writes tests with one tool, somebody with the other one. Did you solve such problem?
No, that's a really good question. I experienced this a lot of times in projects. I feel like it's the easiest if you have the case where you introduce a tool, for example, and the team already had like a code base. Let's say the team was already using the regular assertions from JUnit, and then you suggest to maybe use assert.j. Then in this case, you of course have the advantage that you can simply introduce the others to this testing tool, and it doesn't feel as daunting as if you have, for example, 3 or 5 different testing tools that you have to learn at once. Of course, this is kind of a danger if you have a project where you already have 5 or 7 different testing tools in place, and someone new comes into the team that doesn't know all of those tools. They might feel a bit overwhelmed, just like you mentioned, right? That's totally a concern that I think is definitely valid to take into consideration. Here I'm always struggling a bit. I remember, maybe to mention like a more extreme case. We had a case where we had a front end in Angular, and somebody was writing the front end code, and he constantly repeated certain elements. And so, like, for example, he had like certain things that we got from the backend, and he had to display them. And so instead of using an ng-for, which allows you to essentially like replicate a for loop in Angular to create the elements, he manually duplicated them every time for the different things. And I suggested him to use ng-for, and he mentioned to me that he is against using it because he felt like it would add too much complexity, and ng-for is something that not that many people know. And
additional dependency?
No, it's not a dependency. It's in standard Angular. That's why I mean, like, it's maybe an extreme
kind
case.
of dependency in mental space.
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is in the core of Angular, but still, I mean, it's a valid argument. If you have a lot of people in the team that are not familiar with Angular, and you have an ng-for, they might not be able to understand it as well as if you have a team where everybody is like very well known with Angular. And that was kind of where we were having a discussion, and it's kind of difficult because on the one hand I understand his concerns in this case, but in a way I think the question is like, where do you draw the line? Is the line where you have the ng-for, for example, or like which features do you say are okay and can you expect from a regular engineer, and which ones can you not? And also, like, should this prevent you from writing code that is maintainable and easier to read? I think here we really have to make a case-by-case decision. In this case, we thought that it would not be extreme. We had a discussion with all of the developers in the team, and we kind of discussed, like, is this something that we can require everyone to know or to learn to be able to understand the code base? And we felt like in this specific case it was basic enough that we could expect everyone that develops the backend, at least if you see the keyword, that if you don't understand it, that you look it up how to use it, and then you know how to use it, and then you understand the code much better. I feel like you could say the same about a Java code. In an extreme case, if somebody's a newbie and joins your team like a junior, and he doesn't understand how for loops work, I mean, most of them do, but let's say they wouldn't, would you then not use a for loop in the code?
No. Yeah.
Right.
That's
I mean, that's
extreme.
kind of clear. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of clear.
Yeah.
But I mean, here I feel like it's a similar example, right? If you have only developers in the team who know all of those 7 or 8 testing tools that you use, and you're fine with a new member entering the team with having some kind of a rough start by having to learn a lot of new different things to get into the project, then it might be acceptable. But of course, if you feel like you prioritize the value of having an easier onboarding over having the code more readable and maintainable, then this is, a decision you can make depending on how you feel like is most relevant to you. So here it's really difficult, I feel like, to give a blanket answer. I feel like it makes sense to only introduce testing tools if you feel like they really provide value to you.
Yeah, of course, like everything. Yeah. But as a rule of thumb, I usually use the length of the code, because I think the test should be expressive. It should mostly contain the business specification of the use case, and as few as possible, or boilerplate code. So that's why, for example, I like the SRJ library, because it makes it more expressive and shorter. But yeah, some people will just write the regular assertions, and maybe the difference is so tiny that because one of the questions that you taught was, how can I enforce that just one library is used, and you can use Arch unit for it, which I didn't think about, but yeah, it is possible. But that would be already maybe in this case too harsh, because some people are just used to writing. So if the difference is very small, then maybe I wouldn't do it. But another thing, I can see that you are experienced in both the JavaScript world, or JavaScript/TypeScript world, and Java world. And I can imagine that also in JavaScript there are like multiple tools, multiple libraries, multiple ways to do things. Maybe would you be able to compare these two ecosystems in terms of the unit tests? I only know that there's Jest, and I write some Jest tests, but you probably know more. Which is there a way to compare these two, or are they like almost the same when just using different syntax?
So you mean like if the, let's say, more front-end focused world and the more back-end focused world, like Java versus TypeScript, if those two ecosystems, if they have differences in terms of the testing tools? Is that what we mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you can see that they have both like this richness of what you can do.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really good question. I totally see differences. Yes, so I feel like on the Java side there are some really great libraries that are well maintained and well made. That are, for example, for there is a tool, I don't remember exactly the name, but you can use it for property-based testing in Java, and that one is, in my opinion, one of the best property-based testing tools I've used. And it's not available. There are some for JavaScript, but they aren't as good, in my opinion. And also there's a mutation testing tool which you can use for Java, and it's the gold standard that you can use, and it's called PyTest. And it also is, the gold standard, and actually no other library I found comes close. So I always find it a bit of a pity, because if I want to integrate mutation testing into JavaScript-based projects, I could with other tools, but it's not as good. But on the other side, what I kind of like about JavaScript that makes it really easy is that, since you have much more flexibility in the types, it is much easier to, let's say, set up mock data and fake data and things like this.
But you mean like the union types and in TypeScript, or just JavaScript, like generic objects?
I just meant in general, like for example, in a JUnit parameterized test, I can only pass in one type of parameter per like parameter slot in a method, in a test method, of course, here. And in JavaScript, for example, if I use a data-driven test in Jest, for example, with each, then I can, for example, have different data types in, let's say, the first parameter, which is really useful. And it makes it easier to write certain test cases in a way that is more expressive and easier to write. While, like in Java you can do it, but you have to do some ugly workarounds where you have to, for example, wrap everything into an object or cast it, and you have to cast it back, and usually you don't want to do that, so you tend to write the test just in a way that you don't have to do this, essentially. But JavaScript kind of gives you this flexibility, which is nice. But of course you have to balance this with, since you have different object types, you have to make sure that you don't make it too complex in a way, right? I would say that those are the biggest differences that I've seen. I feel like in general the front-end world, or like the JavaScript world, isn't as rich in terms of the testing tools it provides, just because it probably, not a lot of people write like tests in front-end code, especially not compared to back-end code, and I feel like that probably contributes to that. Yeah.
Okay, maybe one more question. As I focus on integrations, of course, I try to stress that unit tests are good, but they are not very suitable for integration code, because you really want to also cover things like serialization and some nuances of the protocols used, and for that you need some integration tests. But of course integration tests tend to be more flaky and more like fragile, because they involve more things that can break or change. So are there any recommendations that you have on how to combine integration tests with unit tests?
So I think it is very important to follow the test pyramid. So I have a talk on that, by the way, which is called "Why Software Testing is a Waste of Time." Where it's like they have a really nice example where I show exactly like step by step like how I would approach a testing problem. And this is something I would recommend you. Maybe you could look it up on YouTube, or maybe you could include a link somewhere.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's something. And just in general, I think I would try to keep most of the tests in the unit test, and make sure in the integration tests only test what is necessary. And this way you can really make sure that you're not writing too many tests that are integration tests where you test cases that you already test on the unit test level. And this way you have less flakiness. And of course, by the way, if you have flakiness, I've written an ebook on how to fix flaky tests. So you can find it under fm.ht/flaky. Maybe you can also put the link there in case someone is curious to learn how to prevent them. Because I feel like if you think about a few different things, you can really prevent most of the flakiness, and this should help. But again, if you focus on writing only a minimal amount of end-to-end and integration test cases to cover essentially just about right what you need, then you should be kind of fine, because you don't have that many flaky tests to begin with.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, and we continue improving our tests.
Yeah, thank you so much as well. I'm really glad for the opportunity, and thanks for hosting me.